Let us begin with the whole machine. The income approach is not just a formula, it is a way of thinking. It is a way of looking at real estate and asking, what future benefits does this property produce? How durable are those benefits? How risky are those benefits? Who wants those benefits? Who can pay for them? What does the market require in return for buying them today? That is the whole story, but we are going to make it memorable. Here is the chain. Value theory leads to market behavior. Market behavior leads to capital markets. Capital markets lead to highest and best use. Highest and best use leads to income forecasting. Income forecasting leads to capitalization. Capitalization leads to reconciliation. Say it again. Value theory, market behavior, capital markets, highest and best use, income forecasting, capitalization, reconciliation. One more time with meaning. Value theory tells you why value exists. Market behavior tells you where value is revealed. Capital markets tell you what return investors and lenders require. Highest and best use tells you which use should be valued. Income forecasting tells you what cash flow the property can actually produce. Capitalization converts that cash flow into value. Reconciliation asks, after all that, what conclusion is best supported? That is the income approach machine. And for our purposes, Chapter 15 is the core objective. Chapter 15 is where the property becomes a ledger sheet. Chapter 15 is where theory becomes rent. Chapter 15 is where the building stops being a shape on a map and starts being a stream of money. Potential gross income, vacancy and collection loss, effective gross income, operating expenses, net operating income, mortgage debt service, equity dividend. That is the spine. If you remember only one ladder from this lecture, remember this ladder. Potential gross income minus vacancy and collection loss equals effective gross income. Effective gross income minus operating expenses equals net operating income. Net operating income minus debt service equals equity dividend or pre-tax cash flow. Say it while walking. PGI minus vacancy equals EGI. EGI minus expenses equals NOI. NOI minus debt service equals cash flow to equity. That is the ledger, that is Chapter 15, and every other chapter in this sequence helps you do Chapter 15 better. Now let us work backward and forward through the machine. Chapter 2 is Foundations of Appraisal. Chapter 2 asks, what is value? Value is not sitting inside the concrete. Value is not hiding in the drywall. Value is not painted on the outside of the building. Value is created in the minds and actions of market participants. A property has value when people want it, can use it, cannot easily replace it, and can actually pay for it. The four factors are utility, scarcity, desire, and effective purchasing power. Utility means the property can satisfy a human need or investment need. Scarcity means there is not an unlimited supply of equally desirable substitutes. Desire means someone actually wants it. Effective purchasing power means desire backed by money or credit. A broke dreamer may desire a tower, but desire without purchasing power does not set value. A lender with capital, a tenant with rent, an investor with equity, and a buyer with financing, that is effective demand. Chapter 2 also gives you the principle that drives the income approach, anticipation. Anticipation means value today is based on expected future benefits. Say that again. Value today is based on expected future benefits. For a house, those future benefits may be shelter, comfort, school district, pride, and resale. For an apartment building, those future benefits are rent growth, expense control, debt coverage, refinancing, and resale. For a strip mall, they are tenant payments, reimbursements, renewal options, credit quality, traffic, parking, and the eventual sale. This is why investors do not buy buildings only as objects. They buy benefit streams. Now, rhetorical question. If value is the present worth of future benefits, what is the appraiser really appraising? Not just the building. The appraiser is appraising the credibility of the future. How believable is the rent? How durable is the NOI? How safe is the debt coverage? How likely is the reversion? How strong is the market? That is why Chapter 2 matters. It gives you the mental operating system. The second foundation from Chapter 2 is substitution. Substitution says a rational buyer will not pay more for one property than the cost of acquiring an equally desirable substitute. That means your rent is not whatever you imagine. Your rent is disciplined by substitute space. Your cap rate is not whatever you want. Your cap rate is disciplined by substitute investments. Your value is not whatever the owner says. Your value is disciplined by what comparable income streams are selling for. Ask yourself, if I can buy another building with the same risk and same income for less, why would I pay more for this one? That question is the voice of substitution. The third foundation is balance. Balance means value is maximized when the parts work together properly. Land, building, financing, rent, expenses, management, tenant demand, and capital all must be in proportion. Too much building for the land, and you may have over-improvement. Too little building for the land, and you may have under-improvement. Too much debt for the income, and you may have poor CFADS. Too much rent above market, and you may have fragile income. Too little maintenance, and you may have future capital expense hiding inside today's NOI. Balance is not an abstract word. Balance is the difference between a property that works and a property that only looks good. The fourth foundation is externalities. Externalities are outside forces: interest rates, zoning, traffic, new competition, crime, transit, demographics, insurance costs, tax policy, flood risk, neighborhood reputation. For income property, externalities hit the income statement. A new rail station may support higher rent. A new competing apartment complex may increase vacancy. A tax reassessment may raise expenses. A rising interest rate market may raise required returns and reduce value. So Chapter 2 teaches, do not stare only at the building. Stare at the forces around the building. Now move to Chapter 4, Real Estate Markets. If Chapter 2 tells us why value exists, Chapter 4 tells us where value is revealed. Real estate markets are not perfect markets. A share of stock is standardized. A bushel of wheat is relatively standardized. But a property is unique. It is fixed in location. It is expensive. It is regulated. It takes time to produce. It often requires financing. Buyers and sellers are not always fully informed. That means real estate data is messy. And because the data is messy, appraisers must define the market carefully. Chapter 4 asks, what market is this property really in? Residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, special purpose? And then, what submarket? A luxury high-rise apartment building is not in the same submarket as a low-rent garden apartment complex 30 miles away. A neighborhood strip center is not the same as a regional mall. An owner-user industrial building is not the same as a leased warehouse with credit tenants. A student housing building is not the same as ordinary multifamily. Why does this matter for Chapter 15? Because Chapter 15 asks you to forecast income, and you cannot forecast income until you know the market. What is market rent? What is normal vacancy? What concessions are common? What expenses are typical? What tenant improvements are required? What lease terms are standard? What is a normal operating expense ratio? All of those answers come from Chapter 4 thinking. Market first, ledger second. Do not write the income statement before you identify the market. Say that again. Market first, ledger second. Chapter 4 also teaches market segmentation. Segmentation means breaking a broad market into smaller markets where properties actually compete. Here is a practical exercise. Imagine a subject property, a 40-unit apartment building. Do you compare it with all apartments on the island or in the city? No. You ask, what tenants would rent here? What rents can they pay? What other buildings would they consider? What age, condition, location, amenities, parking, transit, safety, and management standards are comparable? If your building rents for $1,800 per month, you do not use luxury towers renting for $4,000 as your main evidence. If your building has no parking, you must understand how tenants price that inconvenience. If your building is near transit, you must understand whether transit improves demand enough to offset parking limits. This is not theory. This is rent. This is Chapter 4 feeding Chapter 15. Market behavior becomes income estimates. Now, Chapter 5. Money markets and capital markets. This is where real estate leaves the neighborhood and enters the financial bloodstream. Real estate is capital intensive. It usually uses debt and equity. Debt means borrowed money. Equity means investor capital at risk. Debt wants safety and predictable payment. Equity wants upside and compensation for risk. A property must satisfy both. That idea becomes crucial in Chapter 16, where we meet the band of investment formula. But before the formula, understand the intuition. Suppose a building produces NOI. The lender asks, is there enough income to pay debt service with a cushion? The equity investor asks, after paying the debt, is there enough cash flow to justify my down payment and risk? That is CFADS thinking, cash flow available for debt service. If NOI is strong relative to debt service, the property is financeable. If NOI is weak relative to debt service, the property may be valuable in theory but dangerous in practice. Chapter 5 explains why interest rates matter. When interest rates rise, debt service rises. When debt service rises, equity cash flow falls. When equity cash flow falls, investors may pay less. When investors pay less, values decline unless income rises enough to compensate. That is why interest rates are not background noise. They are a force inside the value equation. Here is a simple memory phrase. Money cost goes up, value pressure goes down. Money cost goes down, value support goes up. Not always perfectly, not mechanically, but as a general force. Capital markets also influence cap rates. If investors can get attractive returns elsewhere, real estate must compete. If bonds, treasury bills, or mortgages offer higher yields, real estate investors may demand higher returns. A higher required return often means a higher cap rate, and a higher cap rate holding income constant means lower value. Now listen to the basic cap rate formula. Value equals income divided by rate. Value equals income divided by rate. If income is $100,000 and the rate is 10%, value is $1 million. Why? Because 100,000 divided by 0.10 equals 1 million. What does that mean in plain English? It means if the market requires a 10% annual income return on this kind of property, then $100,000 of annual net operating income supports about $1 million of value. Now change the rate. If income is still $100,000 but the market requires an 8% rate, value is $1,250,000. Why? Because 100,000 divided by 0.08 equals 1,250,000. Lower required rate, higher value. Now if the market requires 12%, value is about $833,000. Why? Because 100,000 divided by 0.12 equals about 833,000. Higher required rate, lower value. This is why Chapter 5 matters. Chapter 5 affects the rate. Chapter 15 affects the income. Chapter 16 puts them together. Income divided by rate equals value.
Well, all right, I'm back. It's Mathew Ursua back to finish up the lecture. I think that AI lady was really good. I liked her. And it's really great. And this is really for me to be listening to when I'm exercising in the morning. Why walk to work or back from work, wherever you're going, whatever you're doing throughout the day, or be on a bus on days off listening to things. Why would you be listening to anything except something like this? This is the big book, man. But we ran out of money right there. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be putting up a blog post about that, maybe even making another video about that, and 11 labs that we are using, and it is incredibly costly because we just ran out of money. We paid them $22 every month. Is $22, and that was 2 days ago that we paid them $22, and we got a bunch of credits. And well, it has been 2 days, and actually not even 1 day. It was literally no more than 24 hours ago, and then we just started working, and like that, we are out of credit, so we can't do anything until next month. We can't have beautiful recordings like that made by fake people. We can't deep fake things that are really incredible to be able to learn with engaging and beautiful voices. But what voice is more beautiful than mine, and so this is for me. I love the sound of my own voice. We're going to listen to it. We're going to hear it. You're going to hear yourself, because what better person to be speaking to the world than the one that is really been chosen for such incredible Fields of Alva Scott. We've talked about it. We talked about the story, but we're going to get right into it and finish up where our lovely lady here left off. And we're going to have our link in here that you've probably already seen on the video, and it's going to be there in line in the description too, to learn about why we ran out of money. We're going to have a full review of 11 labs, and we're going to be talking about where things are going. And anyway, it's I can talk about AI and how this is 10 to 20 years, probably even more behind. They could do this in the era of the IBM computer with the tape reels going back and forth, and even back then they were lying about how incredibly effective it was, how digital things were, and what these computers could do with the processing power. Do you think, oh, this thing is analog? It works by knowing where on the tape the pre-recorded thing is, and it plays back the tape, and it can be done over a telephone line. That's how automated answers were done back then with an IBM computer, and it sounded absolutely terrible. You could hear the tape winding and winding and winding and winding. It was going fast, but no, it really had a lot more power than that. And this is 20, 30 years behind, and the technology for deepfake is probably 100 to 1,000 times better than you can hear it. You can hear it synthesized, and they let this company called 11 Labs. Let's make it look like it's a legitimate, advance, not something the elites just didn't want to roll out too fast. But income divided by rate equals value. We were talking about how chapter 16 is going to put together the ideas, right? So if 100,000 divided by 0.12 equals about 833,000, higher required rate, lower value, and this is why chapter 5 matters. Chapter 5 affects the rate. Chapter 15 affects the income. Chapter 16 puts them together. Income divided by rate equals value. Now, chapter 11, highest and best use. Highest and best use is the discipline that stops you from capitalizing the wrong income. The question is not merely what income is the property producing today. The question is, what income should the property produce under its legally permissible, physically possible, financially feasible, maximally productive use? Those are the 4 tests. Physically possible, legally permissible, financially feasible, maximally productive. Say them as a marching cadence. Physical, legal, feasible, maximum. Physical, legal, feasible, maximum. Physical, legal, feasible, maximum. Got to nimble up the lips. Let's just jump right into this. Sally sells seashells down by the seashore. I'm K.I. Tucker. Hawaii News Now. Mathew Ursua dead from eating ass, 35. Hawaii News Now remembers life of freelance photographer Mathew Ursua. Physical, legal, feasible, and maximum. Physical, legal, feasible, and maximum. Say them as marching cadence. And physical means, can it fit? Can it function? Is there access? Utilities? Topography? Parking? Soil? Shape? Size? Legal means zoning, code, restrictions, easements, environmental limits, and allowable use. Feasible means, will it make financial sense? Can the use generate enough return to justify cost and risk? Maximum means among the feasible options, which creates the highest value. Now, tie this to income. Suppose a small old retail building sits on land that can support a much more valuable apartment development. Do you capitalize the old retail rent forever? Not automatically. You must ask whether the existing use is interim, obsolete, or still economically justified. Suppose the old retail building produces $60,000 of net operating income, but redevelopment could produce $250,000 of net operating income after cost and risk. The highest and best use analysis tells you whether the future income stream should be based on continued retail use, renovation, conversion, or demolition and redevelopment. This is why Chapter 11 is the bridge. Before Chapter 15 builds the income statement, Chapter 11 says income from what use? Income from the current use? Income from the renovated use? Income from the legally allowed use? Income from the maximally productive use? If you get highest and best use wrong, the income approach becomes precise math applied to the wrong story. We don't want that. So now we arrive at Chapter 14, the income capitalization approach. Chapter 14 says that income-producing property is usually purchased for investment purposes, and the critical element is earning power. High earnings generally support high value. Higher earnings, higher value. Assuming similar risk, the investor trades present dollars for future dollars. That sentence is everything. An investor trades present dollars for future dollars. So the appraiser asks, what future dollars? When? How risky? How durable? What are they worth today? The income approach includes methods, techniques, and mathematical procedures for analyzing the capacity of property to generate monetary benefits and converting those benefits into present value. There are two main capitalization methods. 1. Direct capitalization. 2. Yield capitalization. Direct capitalization is simpler. It converts 1 year of income into value. Value equals income divided by rate, or value equals income times factor. Yield capitalization is more detailed. It discounts a series of future benefits into present value. That series may include year 1 income, year 2 income, year 3 income, and the reversion at sale. Direct capitalization is taking one stabilized snapshot and pricing it. Yield capitalization is like filming the whole holding period. So yield capitalization is like filming the whole holding period. Sounds a lot like, by the way, since we're digressing, because we really should have made the teleprompter bigger, the Keahi Tucker teleprompter, the Dan Rather teleprompter, because reading this little Word document here is too small. Holding is not hiding. We're not hiding it, we're holding it. So yield capitalization is like filming the whole holding period and discounting each scene back to today. What was I going to say? Snapshot versus movie. Sounds a lot like in physics, dynamics, kinematics, I don't know. So yield capitalization is like filming the whole holding period and discounting each scene back to today. Snapshot versus movie. Direct cap, snapshot. Yield cap, movie. Chapter 14 also distinguishes rates. An income rate is a ratio of 1 year's income to value. A yield rate is used to discount a series of incomes to present value. Do not confuse them. A cap rate is not always the same as an internal rate of return. An overall capitalization rate relates 1 year's NOI to total property value. An equity dividend rate relates 1 year's equity cash flow to the equity investment. A discount rate or yield rate measures return over time. Memory hook. Cap rate, 1 year relationship. Yield rate, multi-year return. Cap is a snapshot. Yield is the movie. Now, chapter 15, income estimates. This is the core objective. This is where you sharpen the pencil. This is where you get out of the ledger sheet. Chapter 15 begins with earning power. The appraiser's first step in determining earning power is to analyze net operating income expectancy. Net operating income expectancy, not fantasy income, not owner bragging income, not broker brochure income, expectancy. What income does the market reasonably expect this property to produce? The appraiser researches the subject's income and expense history, competitive properties, leases, asking rents, vacancy, management budgets, operating data, tax policies, and utility projections. Now picture your ledger sheet. Top line, potential gross income. Potential gross income is the total income attributable to the property at 100% occupancy before operating expenses. Say it again. Potential gross income is the full possible income before vacancy and expenses. It includes scheduled rent, market rent, escalation income, and other income. Scheduled rent is rent from existing leases. Market rent is what the space should rent for in the current market. Escalation income is extra income from lease clauses, often passing through tax or expense increases. Other income might be parking, laundry, antenna space, storage, vending, garage income, or service income. Now subtract vacancy and collection loss. Vacancy means space not leased. Collection loss means that rent is due but not collected. Potential gross income minus vacancy and collection loss equals effective gross income. Effective gross income is the money the property is expected to actually collect before expenses. Now subtract operating expenses. Operating expenses are the costs necessary to keep the property operating and producing income. They include fixed expenses, variable expenses, and replacement allowance. Fixed expenses do not vary much with occupancy. Taxes and insurance are common examples. Variable expenses change with occupancy and operations. Utilities, repairs, management, maintenance, payroll, supplies, and common area costs may vary. Replacement allowances for short-lived items that must eventually be replaced. Roof components, appliances, carpets, parking surfaces, equipment, and similar items. Effective gross income minus operating expenses equals net operating income. NOI, net operating income. This is the engine. This is the number before financing. NOI is the property level income before mortgage debt service and before income taxes. So NOI is what the real estate itself produces. Then if you are analyzing equity cash flow, subtract annual mortgage debt service. NOI minus debt service equals equity dividend, also called pre-tax cash flow. This is where CFADS comes in. CFADS. Cash flow available for debt service is the income available to pay the lender. In many underwriting contexts, NOI is the cash flow available for debt service. The lender asks, how many times does NOI cover annual debt service? That's DCR, debt coverage ratio. Debt coverage ratio equals net operating income divided by annual debt service. If NOI is $120,000 and annual debt service is $100,000, DCR is 1.2. That means the property produces $1.20 of NOI for every $1 of debt service. The cushion is 20 cents. A higher DCR means more safety. A lower DCR means less safety. Now build a miniature example. Imagine a small apartment building. Potential gross income is $200,000. Vacancy and collection loss is $10,000. Effective gross income is $190,000. Operating expenses are $80,000. Net operating income is $110,000. Debt service is $70,000. Equity cash flow is $40,000. Now say it as a ladder. 200,000 potential minus 10,000 vacancy equals 190,000 effective minus 80,000 expenses equals 110,000 NOI minus 70,000 debt service equals 40,000 cash flow to equity. This is chapter 15 on paper. And now, what do we want as investors? High NOI, strong CFADS, reliable debt coverage, durable rent, controlled expenses, a realistic vacancy allowance, a property that can survive bad months and still pay the lender. High cash flow is not just high rent. High cash flow is rent minus vacancy minus expenses minus debt service. A building can have high rent and weak cash flow if expenses or debt service are too high. So do not worship gross income. Follow the ladder down into NOI and equity cash flow. Now chapter 16, direct capitalization. Chapter 16 takes the income estimate from chapter 15 and converts it into a value. Direct capitalization formula is a value equals income divided by rate. For most fee simple income property valuation, the formula becomes value equals net operating income divided by overall capitalization rate. Say it slowly. Value equals NOI divided by RO. RO means overall capitalization rate. The overall rate is the relationship between 1 year's NOI and the total property value. If NOI is $110,000 and the overall rate is 11%, value is $1 million. So why? Because 110,000 divided by 0.11 equals 1 million. What is the logic? The market says for this type of property with this risk at this location, this tenancy, this condition, and this growth expectation, investors require about 11 cents of annual NOI for every dollar of value. So if the property produces $110,000 of NOI, divide by 11% to find the capital sum that income supports. Now, the alternate formula, value, I like to put V in things if I can. Value equals income times factor, and that takes care of it. Value equals income times factor. That's the alternative formula. This is the same relationship expressed with a multiplier. If the rate is 10%, the factor is 10. Why? Because dividing by 0.10 is the same as multiplying by 10. $100,000 divided by 0.10 equals $1 million. $100,000 times 10 equals $1 million. Same math, Different expression. The rate is the required income return. The factor is the price multiple. Rate asks, what annual income return does the market require? Factor asks, how many times income will the market pay? Remember this, rate goes in the denominator. Factor gets multiplied, rate down, factor up. Higher rate, lower value. Higher factor, higher value. Now, direct capitalization depends on market-derived rates. The best method is comparable sales extraction. If a comparable sold for $1 million and had NOI of $100,000, its overall rate is 10%. NOI divided by sale price equals overall rate. 100,000 divided by 1 million equals 0.10 or 10%. The appraiser will extract the rates from comparable sales. He's then going to apply an appropriate rate to the subject. But the comparables must really be comparable. Similar risk, similar income, similar expenses, similar physical and locational characteristics, similar market conditions. If not, the extracted rate may mislead you. Now, the big formula you specifically wanted to remember is that RO equals M times RM plus 1 minus M times RE. Again, RO equals M times RM plus 1 minus M times RE. Now translated, overall capitalization rate equals the mortgage portion multiplied by the mortgage constant plus the equity portion multiplied by the equity dividend rate. One more time, conversationally, the property's overall rate must satisfy the lender and the equity investor. M is the loan-to-value ratio. It is the mortgage share. RM is the mortgage constant. It is the annual debt service divided by the loan amount. 1 minus M is the equity share. RE is the equity dividend rate. It is a cash-on-cash requirement for the equity investor. So the formula blends the debt requirement and the equity requirement into one weighted overall rate. Memory hook, RO is the whole pie. M times RM is the lender slice. 1 minus M times RE is the equity slice. Add the slices and you get the whole pie rate. Now, spoken example here. Suppose the loan-to-value ratio is 75%. That means M is 0.75. The equity share is 25%. That means 1 minus M is 0.25. Suppose the mortgage constant is 13.99%. Suppose the equity dividend rate is 12%. Then RO equals 0.75 times 13.99% plus 0.25 times 12%. The debt slice is about 10.49%. The equity slice is 3%. Add them. RO is about 13.49%. On paper, you would see RO equals 0.75 times 0.1399 plus 0.25 times 0.1200. That equals 0.1049 plus 0.0300. That equals 0.1349, read as a percent, 13.49%. When you see that equation on paper, remember the pie. Debt slice plus equity slice equals overall rate. Lender requirement plus investor requirement equals the rate the property must support. Now ask, what happens if debt gets more expensive? RM rises. If RM rises, the debt slice gets bigger. If the debt slice gets bigger, RO rises. If RO rises and NOI stays the same, value falls. That is Chapter 5 flowing into Chapter 16. Money markets change the mortgage constant. Mortgage constant changes RO. RO changes value. Now, what happens if equity investors demand more cash-on-cash return? RE rises. The equity slice gets bigger. RO rises. Value falls unless NOI rises. That is why investor sentiment matters. Now, the debt coverage formula. Debt coverage ratio equals NOI divided by annual debt service. RO can also be estimated as a DCR times RM times M. RO equals a DCR times RM times M. meaning overall rate equals debt coverage ratio times mortgage constant times loan to value ratio. The intuition is lender first. The lender says, I want the property's NOI to exceed debt service by a cushion. The mortgage constant tells annual debt service per dollar of a loan. The loan to value ratio tells what share of value is financed. The debt coverage ratio tells how much NOI cushion is required. Multiply them and you get a lender constrained overall rate. Memory hook, DCR is cushion. RM is debt cost. M is loan share. Cushion times debt cost times loan share equals lender-driven overall rate. Now, Chapter 17, yield capitalization. Direct capitalization is a snapshot. Yield capitalization is the movie. In yield capitalization, the appraiser forecasts future benefits over a holding period and discounts them to present value. This is used when income is expected to change, leases roll over, expenses change, vacancy changes, financing matters, or resale is important. The future benefits include annual income and reversion. Reversion means the resale proceeds or value of the property interest at the end of the holding period. Imagine a 10-year projection. Year 1 cash flow, year 2 cash flow, year 3 cash flow, all the way through year 10. Then sale proceeds at the end. Each future benefit is discounted back to present value. Why discount? Because $1 next year is not worth the same as $1 today. $1 10 years from now is worth even less today. Money has time value and risk. Yield capitalization says, let us schedule the future, then convert it back to today. This is where DCF analysis lives, discounted cash flow. DCF means itemizing future benefits, placing them in time, and discounting them to present value. Chapter 15 provides the forecast. Chapter 17 discounts the forecast. Chapter 15 says what money comes in and what money goes out. Chapter 17 says what future stream is worth today. If direct capitalization asks what is one stabilized year worth, if yield capitalization asks what is the whole investment story worth. Now, Chapter 21, reconciliation. Reconciliation is the final judgment. It's not averaging. It's not just average cost approach, sales comparison, and income approach. Do not just average cost approach, sales comparison, and income approach. It's not averaging that. Reconciliation asks which indication is most applicable, which has the best evidence, which reflects market behavior, which data are strongest, which assumptions are weakest. For income property, the income approach often deserves major weight because investors buy earning power, but sales comparison may support the cap rate. Cost approach may identify depreciation or replacement cost issues. Market data may challenge the income forecast. Reconciliation is where the appraiser says, after considering everything, this is the most credible value conclusion. For your investment thinking, reconciliation means do not fall in love with one spreadsheet. Cross-check. If your income approach says the property is worth $2 million, but comparable sales cluster around $1.5 million, ask why. Is your rent too high? Is your vacancy too low? Are expenses understated? Is your cap rate too aggressive? Are the comparables inferior? Is there a highest and best use difference? Reconciliation is disciplined skepticism. Now let us put the whole sequence together with one example. You are looking at a small apartment building. Chapter 2 says value is created by future benefits shaped by supply and demand, substitution, balance, and externalities. So you ask, what future benefits does this property create and what forces could change them? Chapter 4 says define the market. So you ask, who are the tenants? What substitute buildings compete? What rents are realistic? What vacancy is normal? What neighborhood trends matter? Chapter 5 says, understand capital. So you ask, what loan terms are available? What interest rate? What amortization? What loan to value ratio? What debt coverage does the lender require? What cash on cash return does equity require? Chapter 11 says, identify highest and best use. So you ask, should this remain apartments? Should it be renovated? Is zoning allowing more units? Is the current use interim? What use is physically possible, legally permissible, financially feasible, and maximally productive? Chapter 14 says use the income approach because the property is bought for earning power. So you ask, what future benefits are being purchased? Chapter 15 says build the income estimate. So you write the ledger. Potential gross income, minus vacancy and collection cost equals effective gross income minus operating expenses equals net operating income minus debt service equals equity dividend equals equity dividend minus, so I have to go back because we screwed that up there. You're going to write a ledger, and then we're going to have potential gross income minus vacancy and collection loss equals effective gross income minus operating expenses equals net operating income minus debt service equals equity dividend. Chapter 16 says convert a stabilized year to value. Value equals NOI divided by RO, or value equals income times factor. Then test the rate with comparable sales, a mortgage equity band, and a debt coverage. Chapter 17 says if income changes materially over time, use yield capitalization. Forecast each year and discount the future benefits. Chapter 21 says reconcile. Do the conclusions make sense? What approach is strongest? What does the market actually support? Now let us drill the formulas again. Formula 1. Potential gross income minus vacancy and collection loss equals effective gross income. This tells you what the property realistically collects before expenses. Formula 2. Effective gross income minus operating expenses equals net operating income. This tells you what the real estate produces before financing. Formula 3. Net operating income minus debt service equals equity dividend or pre-tax cash flow. This tells you what is left for the investor after paying the lender. Formula 4. Value equals income divided by rate. This tells you the capitalized value of an income stream. Formula 5. Value equals incomes times factor, or income times factor, not plural incomes. What am I thinking? I've done my Sally sells seashells down by the seashore exercises like I'm supposed to. Formula 5 is that value equals income times factor. So this is the multiplier version of the same idea. Formula 6 is that RO equals M times RM plus 1 minus M times RE. This blends the lender's requirement and the equity investor's requirement. Formula 7. DCR equals NOI divided by annual debt service. This tests the safety cushion. DCR equals NOI divided by annual debt service, which is Formula 7. This is going to test the safety cushion. Formula 8. RO equals DCR times RM times M. This derives an overall rate from the lender's debt coverage requirement, mortgage constant, and loan-to-value ratio. Now say the most important practical mantra. Income first. Rate second, value third. But before income, market. Before market, value theory. Before capitalization, highest and best use. After capitalization, reconciliation. So the full mantra is theory, market, money, use, income, rate, value, reconcile. Again, theory, market, money, use, income, rate, value, reconcile. Now here is the investor version. Find a market with demand. Find a property with utility. Conform the highest and best use, or rather confirm the highest and best use. The investor thing is to find a market with demand, find a property with utility, confirm the highest and best use, and build a realistic income statement. Maximize NOI through rent, occupancy, expense control, and a better management. Protect CFADS with conservative debt. Use cap rates and yield rates from the market. Test the value. Reconcile against reality. This is how the chapters work together. And if your goal is very high CFADs and NOI, the lesson is this: do not chase buildings, chase durable income streams supported by real markets, disciplined by capital costs, justified by highest and best use, proven on a ledger, converted through capitalization, and checked by reconciliation. That is the income approach machine. That is the income approach machine there. Final repetition. Chapter 2, why value exists. Chapter 4, where market value is revealed. Chapter 5, what capital costs and investors require. Chapter 11, which use should be valued. Chapter 14, why future benefits become present value. Chapter 15, how income is estimated. Chapter 16, how 1 year of income becomes value. Chapter 17, how many years of income and resale become value. Many years of income and the resale become value. That's chapter 17. Chapter 21, how the final opinion is judged, and the heart of chapter, and the heart of all these things is chapter 15. Potential gross income minus vacancy equals effective gross income minus expenses equals net operating income minus debt service equals equity cash flow. That is the ledger. That is the walk. That is the workout. That is the way the income approach turns real estate into a disciplined investment decision. And until we can afford our AI girl to do this for us, for everybody, with a, so my voice isn't raping your mind. But for some people, it helps, if your mind is properly raped. But since you kind of know that's an AI voice, and it's just kind of that borderline between synthesized and it's a little better than IBM tape reel hunting for a place on that magnetic tape to play back over the phone, it's a little better than that. So it rapes your brain with what you need to remember pretty good. But my voice, of course, does the job. So you're welcome. And I'll see you around.